The photograph on her phone screen wasn't scandalous in the traditional sense. They were fully clothed, sitting on an office couch, his arm draped heavily over her shoulders, her head resting comfortably on his chest. It was the caption, "My work husband gets me," that made the air in our living room turn frigid. When I asked, I expected an apology, but instead, I got a defense that sliced deeper than any betrayal. It felt like the beginning of the end, a secret unraveling in slow motion. If you find yourself drawn to these quiet, fracturing moments of human relationships, stay with me. There are many more layers to peel back behind these closed doors. The kitchen island was a slab of cold, white marble, a perfect altar for the dissection of a marriage. Outside, the Seattle rain was a relentless, rhythmic drumming against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the city lights into streaks of gold and charcoal. Inside, the silence was heavier than the storm. Ethan stood on one side of the island, his hands gripping the edge until his knuckles turned the color of old parchment. On the other side stood Clara, still in her work clothes, a sharp charcoal blazer and a silk blouse that had likely cost more than his first car. She was pouring a glass of Pinot Noir, her movements jerky, agitated. Between them lay Ethan's phone, the screen still glowing. It displayed a photo from Instagram, posted 3 hours ago by a junior copywriter at Clara's agency. In the photo, the office lounge was bathed in warm, ambient light. Clara was curled up on a leather sofa, her shoes off, her legs tucked under her, and wrapped around her, like a protective vine, was Julian. His chin rested on the crown of her head. Her eyes were closed, a serene smile playing on her lips that Ethan hadn't seen directed at him in months. "You're being ridiculous, Ethan," Clara said, the cork making a hollow pop as she shoved it back into the bottle. She didn't look at him. She looked at the wine swirling in her glass. Ridiculous. Ethan's voice was low, careful. He was an architect. He understood load-bearing structures. He knew when a beam was cracking. "Clara, he's holding you. You're asleep in his arms. In what world is that professional?" Clara took a long sip, then set the glass down with a sharp clink. She finally met his eyes. Her gaze wasn't apologetic. It was defiant. It was the look of someone who had practiced this argument in the mirror. "We were working on the pitch for the Delta account for 14 hours straight," she said, her voice rising. "We were exhausted. We crashed. That's it. He's your subordinate, Clara. And he's a man. And you are my wife." "Oh, stop with the archaic gender roles," she snapped, waving a hand dismissively. "Julian isn't just a colleague. He's my work husband. We share a brain. We have a connection that helps me survive that shark tank of an office." Ethan felt a cold numbness spreading through his chest. A connection. Yes, a connection. She leaned forward, bracing her hands on the counter, invading his space with her frustration. "My work husband and I cuddle at times. It's platonic. It's comfort. It's harmless." She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly, searching his face for submission. When she didn't find it, she delivered the final blow. "If you don't get it, that says more about your insecurities than it does about my integrity." The room went silent again. The refrigerator hummed. The rain lashed the glass. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the woman he had promised to love, honor, and cherish. But he also saw a stranger who had rewritten the dictionary of their marriage to accommodate another man. She was waiting for him to yell. She was waiting for him to demand she quit, or to forbid her from seeing him so she could call him controlling. She was waiting for the fight that would justify her emotional drift. "It's platonic," The lie hung in the air, glittering and sharp. Ethan realized then that logic had no place here. You cannot explain the color red to someone who refuses to open their eyes. To argue was to validate her premise that this was debatable. He slowly unclenched his hands from the marble. The tension in his shoulders didn't leave, but it changed. It hardened. "Okay," Ethan said softly. Clara blinked, thrown off balance. "Okay? You understand?" "I hear you," Ethan corrected. He picked up his phone and slid it into his pocket. He didn't look at the photo again. He didn't need to. It was burned into his retina. "Good," Clara exhaled, picking up her wine again, a victorious flush rising on her neck. "I'm glad we can be adults about this. I'm going to take a shower." She turned and walked out of the kitchen, the heels of her boots clicking on the hardwood, retreating into the sanctuary of the master bedroom. Ethan stood alone in the kitchen. He didn't follow her. He didn't pour himself a drink. He simply turned off the lights, leaving himself in the dark, watching the rain distort the world outside. He had stopped explaining, and in the silence that followed, he began to calculate the structural integrity of what was left. The restaurant was one of those exposed brick places in Capitol Hill where the acoustics were designed to amplify laughter and the lighting was dim enough to blur boundaries. It was a celebration dinner, something about the Delta account finally signing, and Ethan was the only spouse at the table. He sat to Clara's right. To her left sat Julian. From the moment they sat down, the dynamic was established with the subtle brutality of a magnetic field. Clara shifted her chair slightly, angling her body toward the center of the table where Julian was holding court. She was radiant, her skin flushed with the adrenaline of success and the second glass of Cabernet. This was the Clara Ethan remembered from 5 years ago, sharp, witty, electric. But tonight that electricity wasn't grounding itself in him. It was arcing across the table to Julian. "So then the client says, 'I want it to pop,'" Julian said, using his hands to frame the air. He wore a fitted black turtleneck that made him look like a tech mogul on a retreat. And I looked at Clara, and she looked at me, and we didn't even have to speak. We just knew. Clara threw her head back and laughed, a sound that came from her chest. "Oh my God, I thought I was going to die. It was telepathic. Truly." "You had to be there," Julian added, flashing a polite, cursory smile at Ethan before turning his gaze back to Clara. Ethan took a sip of his water. "I imagine," he said. His voice was swallowed by the ambient noise of clinking silverware and indie rock. The waiter arrived to take their orders. Ethan looked at the menu. "I think we'll split the calamari," he started, glancing at Clara. "Oh, no," Julian interrupted gently, his tone dripping with familiarity. "Clara's off squid this month. Remember the texture thing at the potluck?" He looked at Clara with a teasing grin. "We're doing the roasted cauliflower and the truffle fries, right?" Clara beamed at him. "God, you know my stomach better than I do." "Yes, the cauliflower." Ethan felt a muscle twitch in his jaw. He closed his menu and handed it to the waiter. He didn't look at Julian. He looked at his wife's hand, resting on the white tablecloth. It was inches from his own. Yet she was leaning so far toward Julian that her shoulder was practically brushing the other man's arm. Throughout the meal, Ethan became a ghost. They spoke in a shorthand of acronyms, office gossip, and shared trauma from deadlines. They referenced the Thursday incident and Bagelgate, stories that required no context for them, but left Ethan stranded on the shore of their conversation. At one point, Julian reached over to steal a fry from Clara's plate. He didn't ask. He just dipped it into the aioli she was holding. It was a fluid, domestic gesture, the kind of mindless intimacy that takes years to build. Ethan watched it happen in slow motion. He saw the way Clara didn't flinch, didn't pull back, didn't glance at her husband to see if he minded. She just kept talking, her eyes locked on Julian's face, her fork drawing circles in the air as she recounted a story Ethan had never heard. "You're so quiet tonight, Ethan," one of the other colleagues, a young woman named Sarah, said from across the table. She looked pitying. "Just tired," Ethan lied. He cut into his steak. It was rare, bleeding onto the white ceramic. "Ethan is a landscape architect," Clara announced suddenly, remembering he existed. She placed a hand on his forearm, but her eyes were still darting back to Julian. "He deals with plants. Much quieter than us PR maniacs." "Plants don't talk back," Julian quipped. "Must be nice." The table laughed. Clara laughed the hardest. Ethan looked at his wife's hand on his arm. It felt heavy, performative, a prop to show the table that she was a happily married woman, even as her soul seemed to be sitting in the chair next to her. He didn't pull away. He didn't make a scene. He simply endured the dinner, dissecting the architecture of their interaction. He noticed the way Julian refilled her wine glass before it was empty. He noticed the way Clara sought Julian's approval after every joke. As they walked out into the cool Seattle drizzle later that night, Julian hugged Clara goodbye. It lasted a beat too long. A squeeze of the shoulders, a lingering hand on the small of her back as they pulled apart. "See you in the morning, work wife," Julian said. "Bright and early," Clara replied softly. Ethan stood by the car, keys in hand, watching the streetlights reflect off the wet pavement. He realized then that he wasn't competing with another man. He was competing with a lifestyle, a language, and a version of his wife that only existed when he wasn't around. The apartment had acquired a new rhythm, a quiet cadence defined not by what was said, but by the soft, haptic vibration of a phone against a hard surface. For the next 2 weeks, Ethan watched his wife turn into a ghost. Physically, she was there. She sat on the beige linen sofa in the evenings. She stood by the espresso machine in the mornings. But the essential part of her, the part that laughed, the part that engaged, the part that sparked, had been uploaded into the device she guarded like a second heart. It was subtle at first. The phone, once casually tossed onto the coffee table or left charging on the kitchen island, began to migrate. It went with her to the bathroom. It stayed in her pocket when she cooked. When she set it down, it was always face down. A sleek black monolith concealing a world Ethan was no longer invited to visit. On a Tuesday night, the rain had paused, leaving the city in a damp, heavy mist. Ethan sat in the living room, sketching a grading plan for a terrace project in Bellevue. The only light came from the floor lamp and the blue-white glow of the television, which was playing a documentary neither of them was watching. Clara sat on the other end of the sofa, her legs tucked under her, the phone held close to her chest. Buzz. Ethan didn't look up from his sketchbook, but he felt the shift in the air. Clara's posture softened. A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, a reflex she couldn't suppress. Her thumbs moved across the glass with fluid, rapid dexterity. Buzz. She typed again. This time, a soft exhale of amusement escaped her. A half laugh that she quickly swallowed when she remembered she wasn't alone. In the past, perhaps only a month ago, Ethan would have asked, "Work crisis?" or "Who's funny?" It was the natural curiosity of a partner. But tonight, the question died in his throat. He knew the answer. Asking would only invite the lie. Just a client. Just a work thing. Just Julian sending a meme. Instead, Ethan focused on the shading of a retaining wall. The graphite scratched against the paper, a dry, scratching sound that seemed incredibly loud in the quiet room. "Are you working late tomorrow?" Clara asked suddenly, her voice startling him. She didn't look up from her screen. "No," Ethan said. "I should be home by 6. "Oh." A pause. Her thumbs hovered over the keyboard. "I might grab drinks with the team to celebrate the pitch. It might go late." "Okay," Ethan said. He didn't ask who the team was. He didn't ask if late meant midnight. He just turned the page of his sketchbook. Clara finally looked up, sensing the vacuum where his resistance used to be. She frowned slightly, confused by the lack of friction. She was armed for a battle he refused to fight. "You don't mind?" she asked, her tone hovering between relief and suspicion. "You work hard, Clara. You deserve to celebrate," Ethan replied flatly. It wasn't sarcasm. It was apathy, cold and smooth. She studied him for a second, searching for the trap, but found only his profile as he focused on his drawing. "Right, thanks." She went back to her phone. Buzz. Ethan watched her reflection in the darkened window across the room. He saw the way her face lit up with the next message, a brightness that dimmed the moment she looked at him. He realized he was witnessing an emotional affair in real time, quantified by the screen time usage stats she would never show him. He felt a strange, terrifying peace settle over him. It was the peace of a man who stops swimming against the current and decides to let the water take him where it will. He wasn't the husband anymore. He was the roommate, the spectator, the obstacle to her digital joy. Later that night, in bed, the room was pitch black. Ethan lay on his side, facing the window. Behind him, he felt the mattress shift. Then, the sudden intrusive flare of light. She was under the covers, shielding the screen, typing one last goodnight to a man who wasn't her husband. Ethan closed his eyes. He didn't say a word. He simply memorized the darkness. The candle on the table had burned down to a waxen stump, the flame flickering desperately against the draft from the restaurant's entrance. It was their 5th anniversary, the wood anniversary, meant to symbolize strength and stability. Ethan sat alone at a table for 2 at Canlis, watching the reflection of the city lights shimmering on Lake Union below. He had arrived at 7:30. It was now 9:15. The waiter, a man with kind eyes and professional invisibility, approached for the 4th time. "Another sparkling water, sir? Or perhaps you'd like to order an appetizer while you wait?" "No, thank you," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the hollow ache in his chest. I think I'll just take the check for the wine." He hadn't touched the wine. It sat there, a dark, ruby pool, mocking the celebration that never happened. His phone buzzed on the white tablecloth. It wasn't a call. It was a text. "Clara, I am so sorry. Julian is having a total meltdown about the Q3 projections. He's spiraling. I can't leave him like this. He needs to talk it through. Rain check. Love you." Ethan stared at the words. He needs to talk it through. He didn't reply. He paid the bill, leaving a generous tip to compensate for the pity in the waiter's eyes, and walked out into the cool night air. The valet brought his car around, and Ethan drove home in silence. The radio off, the engine the only sound in a world that felt increasingly empty. When Clara finally stumbled through the front door of their apartment, It was past midnight. Ethan was sitting in the armchair in the living room, still wearing his suit, though he had loosened his tie. The apartment was dark, save for the streetlights filtering through the blinds. Clara froze when she saw him. She looked disheveled, not in a sexual way, but in the frantic, exhausted way of someone who had spent hours pouring emotional energy into a black hole. But underneath the exhaustion, there was a scent that hit Ethan the moment she stepped closer. Single malt scotch. Expensive. The kind Julian kept in his office cabinet for emergencies. God, Ethan, you scared me, she breathed, dropping her bag on the floor. She moved to kiss his cheek, but he turned his head slightly, so her lips grazed his jaw. She pulled back, annoyed. Don't be like that. I told you it was an emergency. An emergency, Ethan repeated. The Q3 projections. Yes, she said, kicking off her heels. Julian has anxiety. You know that. He was hyperventilating. I couldn't just walk out on him. That would have been cruel. It's our anniversary, Clara. I know. She threw her hands up, the defensive wall slamming into place instantly. And I feel bad about it, okay? But dates on a calendar are arbitrary. People are real. Julian needed me. Why can't you have a little compassion? She was rewriting the narrative again. In her version, she was the selfless hero, the supportive friend, and Ethan was the rigid, unfeeling husband, obsessed with a calendar date. You smell like scotch, Ethan said quietly. Clara paused. Her eyes darted away for a fraction of a second. We had a drink to calm his nerves after we finished the work. One drink. Jesus, Ethan, are you sniffing me now? That is so controlling. I'm not sniffing you, you reek of it. Ethan stood up. He felt a profound exhaustion that had nothing to do with the hour. You prioritized soothing another man's anxiety over our marriage, on the one night that is supposed to be about us. It's not a competition, she shouted, her voice cracking. Yes, Ethan said, walking past her toward the hallway. It is, and you made your choice. He didn't go to the master bedroom. He walked past their door, past the framed wedding photos that lined the hall, smiling ghosts of people they used to be, and opened the door to the guest room. He waited for a moment, hand on the knob, a foolish part of him hoping she would stop him, hoping she would grab his arm, apologize, and tell him he was right, hoping she would fight for him. But down the hall, he heard only the rustle of her clothes being removed and the soft click of the master bedroom door closing. She wasn't coming. She was relieved he was gone. Ethan walked into the guest room, the air stale and unused. He lay down on the stiff mattress in the dark, staring at the ceiling, realizing that the guest room was no longer just a room. It was his new address. Silence, Ethan discovered, had a texture. In the beginning, the silence between them had been jagged and sharp, filled with the debris of unsaid words. But as the weeks bled into a month, the silence smoothed out. It became polished, cold, and permanent, like the marble countertops Clara loved so much. Ethan did not move back into the master bedroom. The guest room, with its single window and stiff mattress, had become his sanctuary. He stopped asking when she would be home. He stopped sending texts to check in during the day. He stopped reaching for her hand when they stood next to each other in the elevator. The most terrifying part was not his withdrawal, but her reaction to it. Clara didn't seem to notice the loss. In fact, she seemed relieved. One Tuesday morning, as they navigated the kitchen in their choreographed dance of avoidance, Clara paused while pouring her coffee. She looked at Ethan, who was reading the news on his tablet, eating toast with mechanical precision. I'm really glad we're past that rough patch, she said, her voice light, almost buoyant. Ethan looked up. Rough patch? You know, she waved a hand vaguely. The jealousy thing, the fighting, it feels like we're back to a good rhythm. You're giving me space and I really appreciate it, Ethan. It shows you trust me. She smiled at him. A genuine, sunny smile that didn't reach the dark circles under her eyes, marks of late nights spent working. Ethan felt a strange, hollow sensation in his chest. She didn't see a dying marriage. She saw a compliant husband. She mistook his numbness for understanding. She thought she had won the argument, successfully training him to accept her emotional duality. I'm glad you're happy, Clara, Ethan said. It wasn't a lie. He was glad one of them was happy. I am, she said, taking a sip of her coffee. Actually, speaking of space, Julian and I need to do a site visit in Portland this weekend, for the Nike account. We'll probably drive down Saturday morning and stay overnight to maximize the time. A month ago, this would have been a nuclear event. Ethan would have asked why they needed to stay overnight for a 3-hour drive. He would have asked about separate rooms. He would have demanded boundaries. Now, he simply nodded. Okay. Clara blinked, expecting the resistance she had prepared her arguments against. When it didn't come, she faltered for a second, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. Just like that? Okay? It's work, Ethan said, turning a page on his screen. You have to do what you have to do. Right. Exactly. She exhaled, her shoulders dropping. God, it is so refreshing to be with an adult. That Saturday, Ethan watched her pack. She wasn't packing business suits. She was packing jeans, cashmere sweaters, and the expensive perfume she usually saved for date nights. She hummed as she zipped up her weekend bag. When Julian's car pulled up to the curb downstairs, he didn't even come up to ring the buzzer anymore. Just texted. Clara grabbed her coat. I'll text you when we get there, she called out from the hallway. Don't worry about it, Ethan replied from the kitchen. He was dismantling the espresso machine to deep clean it, a task that required focused, solitary attention. Just focus on the pitch. Clara stood in the doorway for a moment. She looked at his back, perhaps waiting for him to turn around and kiss her goodbye, to tell her he would miss her. Ethan didn't turn. He heard the hesitation in her breathing, the soft rustle of her coat. Then, the sound of the latch clicking shut. The apartment fell silent. Ethan put down the screwdriver. He walked to the window and looked down at the street. He saw Clara run out to the idling black Audi. He saw Julian get out to open the door for her. He saw them laugh, a shared, intimate sound that didn't carry up to the 12th floor, but was visible in the throw of their heads. Ethan placed his hand against the cold glass. He realized he wasn't angry anymore. The anger had burned itself out, leaving only clarity. He was watching his wife go on a romantic getaway with another man, and the only emotion he felt was the grim satisfaction of a scientist whose hypothesis had just been proven correct. The annual retreat for Clara's agency was held at a sprawling cedar lodge tucked deep into the Snoqualmie forest, a place where luxury masqueraded as rusticity. The air smelled of wet pine and wood smoke. Rain dripped relentlessly from the eaves, enclosing the group in a damp, gray cocoon. Ethan had attended these retreats before. In previous years, he had felt like part of the extended family, joking with the creative directors and sharing drinks with the partners. This year, he felt like a ghost, haunting a party he wasn't invited to. The main hall of the lodge was a cavernous space with vaulted ceilings and a massive stone fireplace that roared with heat. After a dinner of roasted salmon and endless bottles of local Pinot Noir, The formality of the corporate hierarchy dissolved into a haze of laughter and loosened ties. Ethan stood near the bar at the back of the room, nursing a tumbler of bourbon. He wasn't drinking it. He was just holding it, using the glass as a prop to avoid conversation. From his vantage point, he had a clear view of the room. He watched the dynamics of the room shift. Colleagues clustered in groups of 3 or 4, loud and boisterous. But near the fireplace, a different gravity was at work. Clara was sitting on a plush leather ottoman close to the fire. Julian sat on the floor beside her, his back resting against the ottoman, his long legs stretched out toward the hearth. They weren't speaking to anyone else. They created a closed circuit, an island of intimacy in the middle of the crowd. Ethan watched as Julian said something low, beneath the crackle of the fire. Clara threw her head back and laughed, her hand coming down to rest on Julian's shoulder. She didn't remove it. Her fingers idly traced the seam of his sweater. A few other spouses were nearby, chatting about real estate and schools. Ethan noticed a woman, the wife of one of the senior partners, glance at Clara and Julian, then glance quickly at Ethan. She looked away just as fast, embarrassed. That was the moment the truth solidified for Ethan. It wasn't just him. Everyone saw it. The platonic defense was a thin veil that fooled no one but Clara. To the rest of the room, they looked like the couple, and Ethan looked like the mistake. As the night deepened, the air in the lodge grew warmer, stifling. "I'm cold," Clara murmured. Ethan was too far away to hear the words, but he saw her shiver, saw her pull her cardigan tighter. Julian didn't hesitate. He didn't offer her a blanket from the stack nearby. Instead, he shifted his position. He rose to his knees and moved to sit on the ottoman next to her. He put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her into his side. It was the exact pose from the photo that had started it all. But seeing it in 3 dimensions, breathing and moving, was visceral. Clara melted into him. She rested her head on his chest, closing her eyes, her face bathed in the orange glow of the firelight. She looked safe. She looked at peace. She looked like a woman who was exactly where she belonged. Ethan felt a physical blow to his gut, a nausea that had nothing to do with the alcohol. It wasn't sexual, at least not yet. It was worse. It was domestic. It was the comfort of 2 souls who had woven themselves together so tightly that they didn't realize they were strangling the people around them. Julian looked up then, his gaze scanning the room. His eyes locked with Ethan's across the dimly lit hall. For a heartbeat, time suspended. Julian didn't pull away. He didn't look guilty. He simply looked at Ethan with a calm, challengeless expression, his hand still firmly gripping Clara's arm. It was a look of possession. "I understand her," the look said. "I have her." Ethan didn't storm across the room. He didn't throw his glass into the fire. The architect in him looked at the structure, saw that the foundation was rotted through, and knew that no amount of renovation could save it. He set his unfinished drink on the bar. He turned his back on the warmth of the fire, on the laughter, on his wife wrapped in another man's arms. He walked out of the heavy oak doors into the cold, driving rain of the night, feeling the first clean breath of air he had taken in months. The morning light was gray and unforgiving, filtering through the high windows of the lodge like dirty water. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt heavy, pressing against Ethan's temples as he opened his eyes. The other side of the king-sized bed was made. The pillow was unindented. Ethan sat up, the cold air of the room biting at his bare skin. He didn't need to check his phone to know where she was. At dinner the night before, Amidst the wine and the laughter, Julian had loudly proposed a sunrise hike to catch the mist over the valley. Clara had agreed with a flushed enthusiasm, her eyes bright with the promise of shared adventure. Ethan walked to the window. Down below, near the trailhead that led into the dense tree line, he saw them. Two figures in high-performance gear, breath pluming in the chill air. They weren't touching now, but they walked in a synchronized rhythm, their strides matching perfectly. They looked like a unit. They looked complete. Ethan turned away from the window. He didn't feel the crushing weight of heartbreak anymore. Instead, he felt a strange, clinical detachment, like a surgeon preparing to amputate a limb that had long since turned gangrenous. It was necessary. It was survival. He pulled his suitcase from the closet. He packed with the same methodical precision he applied to his landscape blueprints. Shirts folded in thirds, socks rolled tight. He didn't pack everything, just enough. The rest didn't matter. The physical objects of their life together, the espresso machine, the imported rugs, the art they had bought in Santa Fe, were just props on a stage where the play had already ended. When the bag was zipped, the sound echoed in the empty room like a gunshot. Ethan looked around the room one last time. It smelled faintly of her vanilla shampoo and the wood smoke from the night before. He walked to the small writing desk in the corner. He took a piece of hotel stationery and a heavy ballpoint pen. He sat down to write. He thought about listing the grievances. He thought about describing the humiliation of the dinner, the missed anniversary, the nights spent watching the back of her phone. He thought about screaming on paper, but he remembered her voice. If you don't get it, that says more about your insecurities. To explain was to validate. To argue was to engage. Clara thrived on the engagement. She wanted the friction to prove that her platonic love was worth fighting for, or that his jealousy was the real problem. Ethan uncapped the pen. He wrote 2 sentences. Clara, you were right. I didn't get it, but I do now. You didn't need a husband. You needed an audience. And I'm tired of watching. Ethan. He placed the note on her pillow, right in the center, where she couldn't miss it when she returned. Flushed and happy from the woods. He placed his wedding band on top of the paper. The gold ring looked small and insignificant against the white sheet. Ethan picked up his bag and walked out. The lobby of the lodge was quiet. Only a few staff members setting up the coffee station. They nodded at him politely. Ethan walked out to his car, threw the bag in the passenger seat, and started the engine. As he drove down the winding gravel road, leaving the lodge and the forest behind, he checked his rearview mirror. He half expected to see her running after him, or to feel a pang of regret. But the road behind him was empty. He reached the main highway and turned south, back toward Seattle, back to a city where it was still raining. But where, for the first time in months, he wasn't waiting for the storm to break. He was just driving through it. 6 months later, Seattle looked exactly the same, gray, wet, and relentlessly busy. But the landscape of Clara's life had been razed to the ground. They met at a coffee shop in Pioneer Square to sign the final papers. It was a neutral location, chosen by Ethan's lawyer. The interior was exposed brick and reclaimed wood, filled with the hum of espresso machines and the murmur of tech workers on their lunch breaks. When Ethan walked in, Clara felt the air leave her lungs. He looked good. That was the most painful part. He didn't look broken. He looked rested. The tension that had lived in his shoulders for the last year of their marriage was gone. He wore a raincoat she didn't recognize and held an umbrella that wasn't the one they had bought together in London. These small, new details were proof of a life that was continuing without her. "Hello, Clara," he said, pulling out the metal chair opposite her. His voice was polite, the kind of tone one uses with a distant acquaintance. "Hi, Ethan," she managed. She kept her hands wrapped around her warm mug, trying to stop them from trembling. He placed a manila envelope on the table. He didn't waste time with small talk. He didn't ask how she was. He simply slid the documents across the scratched wood surface. Clara looked at the papers, but her mind drifted to the night before. She had been at the office until 9 p.m., working on a crisis management strategy. Julian had been there too. They had ordered Thai food. They had laughed. It felt like the old days. But when the clock struck 10, Julian had stood up, stretched, and checked his phone. "Gotta run," he'd said. "Date night with Maya. Don't stay too late, work wife." He had left. He had gone home to a real life, to a woman he held in the dark, leaving Clara alone in the empty office with the hum of the server room and a half-eaten container of pad thai. The work marriage ended the moment the elevator doors closed. It had no weekends. It had no sick days. It had no silence to share. "I miss you," Clara blurted out. It wasn't what she planned to say, but the silence of the last 6 months had built up a pressure she couldn't contain. Ethan paused, his pen hovering over the signature line. He looked up at her, his eyes clear and devoid of anger. "I know," he said softly. "Julian, it's not—" She struggled, tears pricking her eyes. "It's fun, but it's not real. I didn't realize that until you were gone. I thought I could have both." "You could have," Ethan said, and the past tense cut deeper than any insult. "You just chose the wrong one to prioritize. Can't we try again? Ethan, I never slept with him. I never crossed that line." Ethan signed the paper with a fluid, final scratch of the pen. He capped it and looked at her with a sad smile. "Clara, you crossed the line every time you took a piece of yourself that belonged to us and gave it to him. Sex is just mechanics. What you gave him was intimacy. That's much harder to get back." He pushed the signed papers back toward her. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said. "Truly." He stood up. He didn't linger. He didn't look back. He walked out of the coffee shop and into the rain, opening his new umbrella and stepping into the crowd. Clara sat alone at the table. Her phone buzzed on the wood surface. Work husband, Julian. "Hey, did you see the email from client services? Total disaster. Need you to look at it ASAP." Clara looked at the message. She looked at the empty chair where her husband used to sit. The buzz of the phone demanded her attention, a relentless, shallow pull that would never truly be enough. She picked up the pen Ethan had left behind. It was heavy in her hand. She signed her name on the line, finalizing the trade she had made without reading the fine print. Outside, the rain washed the city clean, but inside, she was just beginning to drown.